Welcome to the Independence by Design podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a business owner and ways to get unstuck from the day-to-day so we can design a business that gives us a life of independence. Welcome back and thanks for tuning in. I'm super excited for you to listen to this conversation with Nick Bradley, who's become a dear friend of mine over the years. He's got a podcast called Scaling Up with Nick Bradley. He's got a book that's about ready to be released. And Nick came from the world of private equity, where he's done billions of dollars worth of deals. And his passion is about bringing that level of the game of ownership and private equity into the middle market to help owner operators like the people listening into this show and the people that I'm working with. And we cover a lot of ground in this conversation because I get a lot of excitement out of understanding what's going on and what he's seeing in the marketplace. So we talk about what's going on in the world of private equity, some of the headwinds that they have with interest rates and deals. And he drops an interesting stat that the models used to go off of 8 out of 10 of PE portfolio companies succeeding, where now it's down to 2 out of 10. What that might mean for you as an owner operator looking to sell to private equity. We also talk about what's broken with the words exit planning. What does that really mean? And how do we build a business that is not just growing for growth's sake? Because so many times that consumes us instead of sets us free. And we talk a lot about what does that mean to be set free and how the people that are building out financial models and the playbooks that we're talking about are setting themselves apart and creating tons of options for what they want to do with themselves, their lives, and their business. And don't forget, if you want to check out the video, go to YouTube or Spotify. And please do me a favor, share this episode with a friend that you think might enjoy it and give the podcast a rating on your podcast player that you're listening to. If you can figure it out, I know it's a pain in the ass, but I would really appreciate it because it helps me continue to get great guests on the show. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Nick. It's fun that we got history now. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's what's fun is we're not, getting into the, hey, by the way, what's up, Nick? My name's Ryan.
I know, we've done this about 3 times, haven't we? 4 times? I don't know. I can't remember. I lose track.
Yeah. So, I'm excited to catch up, man, because I know you've been diving into the talkie stuff and you've kind of modified your business model, as have I. And I think we're both targeting similar clientele of the owner operators. And, we got different, from what I've gathered, different slight variations and stuff like that. And I think if there was like 10,000 Nick and Ryans, there would still not be enough people to help these people. So it's been fun watching your journey, man. So like, how's the Black Belt program going?
Yeah, it's been great because I suppose the learning for me, right, when we last spoke, it came from one of my mentors. I think I shared this with you where like when you come from sort of my private equity background, which has its pros and cons, and we've talked about that before, right? Probably more pros than cons if I'm honest, but there's some idiosyncrasies around it.
Yeah, it's your experience, right? I mean, I think that's one of the things I want to dive into, Nick. It's your experience, which is different than my experience. And like, it's us having these conversations that sync up the truth, I think, for the listeners. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah. And I think, let's talk about that today. Because I think actually there's a better angle of that stuff that maybe doesn't get talked about enough. And because I've been on both sides of the table, I can address it. But in terms of the big epiphany for me, so I was doing lots of what I call quite top end exit strategy work. So the stuff that sits well above, I think, anything they teach you in a SEPA exit planning institute course, right?
Well, and if there's actually people listening in, most of the owner operators don't even know what the hell that means. So
no, well, there's for everyone listening in, right? There's a group called the Exit Planning Institute, and they effectively teach exit strategy and exit planning to advisors. So if you've got a wealth management company, they kind of add another. What's it when you add another kind of arrow to
it's an alphabet soup at the back of your name. It just confuses the owners even more about what you actually do and how you make money.
And it's very basic, right? So like if we get into a bit of exit strategy stuff today, like the stuff they teach you is what I call what everyone teaches you. And it's kind of what most people will start to work out if they just read a book. So the stuff that I was doing was very different because it was usually certainly
top end M&A stuff. I mean, you were dealing with professional shit like that. That's why I found it so fascinating. And sorry to interrupt, but like you like as you jumped into this, Nick, I'm like, isn't this just elementary shit for you? Like it was just confusing because like I came at it from the operator side, you came at it from the PE side, and then all of a sudden we both kind of had all these epiphanies together. And so like, what was your experience where you're like, this is what's going on in the marketplace?
I mean, some of it's good. I mean, like, at the end of the day, right, a lot of people, and I think you and I will probably agree on this, a lot of people get lost in their journey of growing and scaling a business when it comes to value, and they don't really understand the dynamics of that. And we've got the financial value and we've got the strategic value. And I think there are elements that those two areas are right. And I've been involved in transactions that have sold for significantly more than what the financial value would have been predicated
I
on.
want to double click on that, Nick, at some point in this conversation, because by the time this podcast goes out, I've done like about 5 or 6 episodes in a row about deal structures, internal rate of return, and like really diving into the free cash flow versus the strategic valuation, all that stuff. So we don't have to right now, but I'm just dropping the note because like there's a lot of context for that conversation for us to step on, like, onto a second or third base.
Let's definitely get into that. But my sort of experience of it, right, is so I was going into these businesses, and remember my background is 3 exits over $1 billion as well, right? So we're talking the top end private equity transactions, some of the biggest that happen within any given year. So I'm sort of all of my client base. Back to your original question, everyone I was working with was building towards a high 8, sort of low to mid 9-figure transaction. And I'm not I've been very clear, I'm not brokering these deals. I will make connections, but I'm going in there, and a lot of the time I'm working on that founder and their leadership team on what it takes to compete in this totally different playing field, right? And so that's all great, but I can only do that with maybe 5 to 10 businesses per year. I mean, I think the maximum I've ever done in one year is 12, but it's incredibly tiring. Like, I mean, I'm on a plane all the time, Ryan. I'm on phone calls with lawyers. I'm talking to, all sorts of different kind of people within a deal team, internal and external, trying to get them all aligned on what is going to be a massive outcome, but they have to be aligned for it to work.
Right. And for the listeners, and for what I find so fascinating, Nick, is like, even on the top end, so like, just maybe to clarify how you worded it, you weren't even the investment banker, right? Like you're the guide in connecting, and I understand what all that means when you say connecting all these dots, but like, think about how insane that is. You have all these advisors making close to seven figures on a deal that still can't communicate like adults on a one big project. So Nick has to get involved, and like, so effectively, like, it's so fascinating for me, Nick, because like it's 10 times more dysfunctional in the lower middle market, maybe 100 times. And I say, like, and I think about like in 12 deals like that, where you effectively, I mean, do you think that this is a fair statement? Like, that is what an investment banker should do, but they just don't. They just like why is it that like you're like, what is the the gap for you? Because I got asked to do a deal recently, and it would have been like a nice 6-figure deal, and I was just like, no, thank you. I'm going on vacation with my daughters. I have zero desire to have you call me at 9 o'clock at night. And I just know the time value of money in that dynamic of what it takes. And so, like, why is that still a thing at the top end of the market?
You've
Like,
got to understand what an investment banker is and isn't, right? And I don't think an investment banker is going to come and, like, if you use the real estate analogy, because
if you're
everyone
just
gets
using
it,
that
right?
coach still, like someone that's
Well, I think it's
comprehensive.
like, if you think about a real estate agent, right? A real estate agent can come and appraise your house, but they're not going to come and really look at all the detail. They're not going to go and look at every bloody room and look at the walls to see if there's like, they're not inspecting for damp or subsidence. They're like
Well,
going,
not only that, and also like understanding, like, what does this piece of real estate mean to your financial picture, to your income, to
no,
like,
and to your point, Ryan, you've said this consistently, I think, since we've known each other, right? Like, the growth or the gain, if you like, that an investment banker is going to get versus the work it takes to do what I do or what others do properly, it's a totally different skill set. Like, I mean, what I do, right? If people kind of want to give it a terminology, is what is called a private equity operating partner, right? And I'll explain what that is if people have never heard it. So when you sell your business to private equity, the first thing they do is they give you an operating partner that kind of is there to mentor and advise the founder in this new world, right? You're
the
now in
new
this new
playbook, the
world,
owner playbook of like grow value and all
but
that.
also
Yeah,
this: you don't own
yeah,
your company anymore, dude.
yeah,
Right? I own your company. We're going to put someone around you so that you don't freak out. Right? Because you've seen this, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
imagine you've owned your company for 30 years and then all of a sudden you don't, but you've got a few $1 million sitting on an earnout,
yeah, yeah.
right? You're going to freak out. So I'm put in there to do a lot of things. I'm put in there to make sure that that doesn't happen. So it's a risk mitigation strategy. I'm in there to pseudo run the business. If you really, I'm
Hmm.
really honest about it, like from a kind of arm's
Yeah.
length perspective, but I'm
Yeah. Yeah.
meeting
Yeah.
everybody. And so the investment banker, to your point, the investment banker's not going to do that.
No, fair enough. And like, so it's so fascinating because like this is where like I think about over the last 6 years of you and I converging on a similar path. Like, because the only reason not the only reason, that's a rough, too rigid. It's like in the private equity space, they're forced to do this. And you like back in your world, like you could push that, and there's political and graceful ways of doing that and respecting the person and like in like all the things that I think you and I share in morals and values. But at the end of the day, the game is internal rate of return in certain period of time, so we have to do this stuff. We just have to do it gracefully. But like when you're at like when I think about what you were doing, and that this would kind of lend insight into like what you're doing now and how you're scaling this. But like you coming in, but you're just not on the cap table, right? So you're bringing that mindset and that playbook and everything, but you're just working through this with them in a way where you're bringing that expertise and that
Yeah, I'm
guidance.
not
And
on the, I mean, the way I was working, I'll go to kind of what I was doing for the last probably 4 or 5 years to what I'm focusing on now. It's kind of the same thing, but there's a different journey, right? And this is where there's a bit of, I think, overlap with what you're doing, but there's also quite a big distinction, which I'll get into, right? So like because I was working with anywhere between, as I said, 5 to 12 of these businesses in a very embedded way, um, it's great. Like it's a lot of fun. I still do it, right? I still do it with a very select number of what I call partner clients, where I am very embedded and I am on the cap table, right? But one of my mentors said to me, he said it quite funny. He said, "You know what, Nick? You know your problem is you love the Big Mac, but you hate the Happy Meal." And I said to him, "You love this." I said, "I hate McDonald's, dude. You know nothing about me. I just
I was gonna say like you're the
I'm
Iron
like a
Man. You're
keto dude.
like
Like
you.
I'm drinking 3.5 liters of water a day and eating kind of like 180 grams of protein. Man, I'm not eating a Big
Yeah.
Mac. Anyway,
Yeah. Analogy, failed analogy here. What's your point, mentor?
no, but he nailed it. He basically, and
Uh,
then he said to me, this was the killer line, and he's a pretty famous guy. He goes, "Do you know what? One of my clients last year sold their business for $580 million." I went, "Okay, you got my attention." He goes, "I started working with them when they did their first 750,000 in revenue, and it took 5 years to get to that valuation, or actually just over." I'm like, "I get the point." He said, "It's great that you work with them when they're at the 580 million stage, but what happens about the beginning? Why don't you want to be there a little bit at the beginning?" And I thought, "Oh, that's a great idea." So what I did in the last 12 months is just created the beginning, right? And in many cases, because I started Scale Up Your Business, which was obviously the original name of my show, because I started that in 2019 and it was all about growth and scale, I just leaned a bit more into that. So now I have a group of business owners who are all seven figures and above. So we don't start any earlier than that. And the goal is to, we give them a pointed goal to get beyond 10 million. But within that goal of getting beyond 10 million within 36 months, we are doing a lot of other things, which is teaching them through the process to build more value in their companies. But we don't lean on that. And the other thing is we don't talk about exiting, not in the way that we would maybe talk about it like you and I have in the past. It's a goal and an outcome and a choice if people want it. But if they think about that too much, they get distracted by what they should be doing, which is building a really good business from the outset.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's what we do. But we only focus on service-based businesses.
Oh, really?
That's
Interesting.
all. Yep. And there's a reason for that. And they can be
So
consumer-based
service being like the payroll is the biggest expense. And
agencies and consultancies, Ryan.
oh, so that's new since you and I chatted last. Huh?
Yep. Mainly agencies and consultancies, 80%. And the reason
Hmm.
is when I launched the program, we had 25 people sign up straight away. 80% were agencies and consultancies. And when I say that, like they could be like an IT services advisory.
Yeah. Anybody that's payroll delivering
Yeah,
services.
yeah, delivering a
Yeah.
product-based service
Yeah.
of some description. Definitely not technology businesses where they have to go and raise venture capital, and
Yep.
no direct to consumer. Even though I've got a couple of partner clients that are in that
Mm-hmm.
space, not in
Mm-hmm.
not. And the reason for that, and again, is if you want to teach a program where there's a curriculum and there's an outcome and all of that, it's so much easier to focus on what everyone has a commonality of issues or challenges, and then you can actually have a much more scalable way of helping them. Plus, it's also I was a CEO 4 times for service-based businesses.
Yeah.
So I've
Yeah.
kind of it's my lane. So that
And
is a bit of a change.
isn't it 2/3? I mean, I think it's like 2/3 of the US economy anyways.
Yeah, I didn't know that,
Fascinating.
but it just resonated with
Yeah. Well,
people
the
who I
US effectively, and we're learning the hard way as we speak today that we outsource pretty much everything over the last 30 years, and we're just the top of the supply chain. So we won't get into that.
I know there's tariffs with the UK or something being announced at the moment. I haven't even looked at
You,
it.
yeah, everybody pretty much, it sounds like. So very similar, I'd say, philosophies and approaches from both of our businesses, and I'm building my model off of the Takimore coaching model as well. And I think that's why I said, like, it's so fun watching. Here's my take out of this, Nick, is like the fact that you and I are helping the same middle market entrepreneur, and we can get into more specifics of like size and companies and stuff like that, and like maybe into your curriculum, because like, and it's a lot of education based and then accountability based. I mean, it's all coaching, right? And which I think is, if there was literally 10,000 of us, I don't think there would be enough for how many people need this help, because I mean, like, you're one of the only people, and I can truly say that out of all this time, Nick, that like, you've done it before. Ken Sanjanari, who both you and I know, he's been on the podcast a couple times recently, operating finance people that have chosen to become a coach in some form or fashion, understand it, versus just like the theorists and academics of advisors, which are all necessary. And I've gone through my own personal journey, Nick, of like going from kind of crabby towards how effed up the market is to like, it is what it is, and like I can find my place in it. And like, I say all that because
take me through what because I mean, obviously we're going to release this on our shows, right? Take me through what you're doing now, so people know you from when you've come on Scale Up beforehand. We've had Walker on. We've had that was a great fireside chat last time.
Yeah, it was.
We'll do that again.
Yeah.
But you've gone through a bit of a change, right? So what's been that sort of last 12 months for you?
So the kind of, just to put a cliff note on the last 10 years since we sold the family business, I would say that like this problem that you and I are honing in on, I mean, I lived it, right? You lived it from a different side, which I think is so cool about our relationship. And like, so I lived the, grow and sell a company. It was, doing 20 million in revenue, and sold it to a strategic buyer. So the cash flow valuation versus the strategic valuation, I mean, doubled the sale price because of who we sold to. But I gutted the company and I went home and I cried, paid a lot in taxes. And I was like, what the hell was that? So I say all that because it's been like, if someone were to look at me and like be like, what the hell have you done for 10 years? It doesn't kind of make sense from the outside. But if you're my wife, she for sure knows that in handfuls of people, where it's like the common thread, Nick, is like, it's like, how do I solve this problem? Like and the problem is you build this company, it swallows you up. And the whole reason that my dad started the business and I was in the business, I want to do whatever the hell I want every day. I mean, as an entrepreneur, I don't want anybody to tell me what to do. I want freedom over my time. And then we get swallowed up by these operating businesses, and you can't just grow your way out of it. And I learned that 15 years ago. And I think that the world is realizing, hey, by the way, when everything doesn't,
in my opinion, Ryan. I mean, I think if you try and grow your way out of it, you actually create a bigger issue.
I'm aware.
and well, there's two. I mean, I'll get into this in a bit, but there's two, in my opinion, there's two types of businesses, right? And like you could argue there's lots of types of businesses, but there's only two that I really think are the main business models. And I think you need to make a choice which one you want to kind of build. You can
describe business model for me. Yeah, give me the two.
Well, one's the traditional lifestyle business, right? Which can still be a 7-figure income if you get it right? But it has less people and complexity. And I think these days with AI and technology, it can become even less than that. But like, you might have somewhere between 4 and 8 people working in your team. You're probably virtually based. It probably is a service business in some way, shape, or form, right? It doesn't have to be. But it maximizes the lifestyle of the owner versus growth. And the second business is a growth business, which quite frankly, you are probably building towards a capital event, because you're not going to be making money through it, because everything that you're doing is building towards some form of growth in the asset, which means you only really make money when you liquidate that asset. Now, of course, you can draw like little Venn diagrams and say there's something in the middle. But I often find,
which I have.
Well, and there probably is. But when I work with someone, like, I'm really clear with them. I'm like, hey, what are you building? Oh, I don't know yet. I might change my mind. It's much easier if you can try and work it out from the beginning, right? Like,
well, you have to.
Yeah,
Like
I think so.
mathematically and like mechanically, you have to like not deciding is the worst thing anybody could do. I think to your point, it's like not deciding what your outcome is. I mean, like you get in the car. I mean, like you and I are both, you know, I don't know what your the last it's not Tough Mudder or whatever the hell it is, but whatever your
I used to do high rocks. Well, I
High
do all that
Rocks,
sort of
whatever.
stuff. Like, yeah,
You sent, yeah, you sent me like I don't compete, but you and I are both on the fitness side. Or you get in a car, like you have your freaking goal identified, and so we can talk. I want to get to this because this is like the meat of like what I want to synthesize back and forth, and I
I
think
want
this
you to
is
tell us
even.
what you're doing, though, Ryan.
Yeah, I know that's what I'm saying. That like I wanted to put a pin in this because I think this in strategic versus cash flow valuation and like what we're doing, I think in kind of our curriculums and our philosophies, I want to really unpack. But so back to like how I got here, Nick, and because I think that's some of the context that people are needing. So I had 3 companies over 10 years. So and because this all is insights into how I and why I landed on where I did. So the first company I got in, I mean, after we sold and I was like very regretful, got into finance. So I got my securities license and all that kind of stuff. That was not my jam at all because I feel like you're sitting there waiting for someone to liquidate instead of like building the value. And that, but what was important about that, Nick, is that's where finance and operations became intersected for me, right? Like you came at this from finance. I came at it from operations where I knew how to sell shit. I understood revenue. I understood operations, like all the 8 functional areas of like Ken's program, like lived it, man, turned our business around. But like, that's where it all intersected. The second company that I had was a consulting company doing the VOP, value growth assessments, due diligence, growth and exit planning, and all that shit. And I realized that I built a business that no one wanted to work with because no owners understand what exit planning is. I mean, so psychologically, like I'm not sitting here going like, you know, I'm just going to die on this mountain of like exit planning. No one wants. It's like I literally tried for like 4 years and I built a business where it attracted all of the shittiest companies and I repelled all of the good companies I could help. It's just like, this doesn't work.
Why do you think that was the case? Is it just because people don't understand what exit planning is, or they don't actually want it?
I don't know what it is
It's a
either.
bit like going
Dude,
to
I've
the
been doing this
doctor
for 10
where
years.
you don't want to go to the doctor, but you know you should, right?
I think I mean there's a lot here, but like this is very important to like how I actually even worded all of my companies over the last 6 years. It doesn't work, dude. Like I had people like and we can actually get into the macro stuff as well as the financials and all the demographic issues. And like, I mean, like I've spent so much time understanding this because I lived it, right? So exit planning, I don't know what it is. And first of all, when I joke around now in all my keynotes, I'm like, okay, does private equity exit plan? No, they buy assets at a good value, they grow them and sell them in a tax advantage way. What the hell is exit planning? And then wealth management should be estate planning and cash flow management for the personal side. What is exit planning?
We do.
By the way,
I mean, I'll tell you what we do in private equity. We just don't call it exit planning. We call it liquidity event, right? And when we buy a business,
same thing with real estate though, Nick. Like
we
real
talk
estate
about
investors.
the exit. We talk about the exit the day we buy the business. So
But this is my point. Like it's investing. Like I don't know what exit planning is because this is core to my stuff. It's like, so okay, I mean, are you talking about your job or your asset? And no one ever can answer that question. I've had 2,500 people to come through my material in the last 3 years, and I'm like, you want out? I'm like, I won't even answer that question out. Out of what? I've got half the people that would honestly love to get out of their job and keep their asset. I got other half of the people that want to monetize their company and then keep their job. And it's like,
so
okay,
that's where I join the line between the lifestyle and growth because like in my sort of scale up program, about half of them just want to free themselves up and have the business. They just want to have someone else run it. Right? They don't want to sell it. They've got no interest in selling it. But then I've got a couple of guys who are making, you know, multi 7-figure incomes off their businesses, and quite frankly, they probably can't sell them. And they're going to have a different strategy for what
yeah,
they do
yeah,
when they
yeah.
get older. You see what
You
I
and
mean?
I are on the same page. Yeah, we're on the same page.
I think the word exit becomes a bit of a weird word, right? Because it's not really about an exit. It's more about kind of what you want the business to provide for you, right? And there are different options around that.
And what are you talking about when you say exit? Are you talking about your job or your asset? If we can't even agree on something like that, how can we even have a discussion? Like W2,
most people. The other thing, just to build on this,
Nick, like your W2 income is on the income statement. and ownership gets distributions from free cash flow after working capital, taxes, and debt.
I don't know
So
anything
like,
about that. I'm moving to Dubai, Ryan, so none of that actually exists over there. It's become too
Fair.
confusing for us, so we're going out there. So we thought, you know what,
So
we don't want
like,
to even
but
submit tax returns.
okay, I'll be. Yeah. Screw
I'm
you.
joking
Screw
around.
you.
I'm joking around.
I'm in Minnesota where it's at like, freaking 11%, dude. And it's cold. And yeah. Anyways. But like the operations is on the income statement, and then the cash flow statement is for the owners. So like, I don't even know what exit means. So like, I'll go around a room and be like, I want out. I'm like, I literally can't solve your problem unless like, if you, it's like, if we're the workout plan, if someone said, I want to be healthy, Nick, and you're like, do you want to be the powerful lifter of the world, or would you like to be the longest runner in the world? I'm not willing to have that conversation with you. You just need to solve my problems for me. I want to be healthy, Nick. And it's like, well, like words matter and nuances matter. We have to double click in because like, how can you be
the first thing we do in my program? And it's the first 30 days. And actually, if you don't do it, you get kicked out. I'm not kidding you. This is the first, we do a thing where if you don't do this in the first 30 days and you haven't completed it, like with some support, you're not allowed to continue. Right. And we do we call it a clarity accelerator, but it's a vision exercise. And we do it through two lenses. We do it through your personal vision first, and then we do it through what the business looks like. And there's different ways you can do it, but I often say to them, like you're saying, I say, so okay, next 3 years, reverse engineered. What does your world look like in 3 years' time? Explain your world to me. Where are you traveling to? What sort of, what are your kids doing? Uh, you know, cars,
what's
whatever
your
it is.
goals?
Yeah.
What's your goals?
And if they can't complete that exercise, we can't then go into the next phase because everything is then designed around what that looks like, as opposed to, hey, your business is worth 50 million or something.
Yeah, because like so this is what's super fascinating, and again, maybe I'll finish my thought because I want to come back to also like goals neurologically pull us forward with dopamine versus pushing us away through fear. So like the reason that there's identity crisis is I'm like neurologically people are addicted to the dopamine of winning in their business and they can't actually get out of their job. So like all of this is commingled together. So to not acknowledge that is insanity. But like go back to how did I figure all this stuff out? I went through it. Right. So then the second company, consulting company, I would charge 40 grand for these projects, completely unscalable because like, again, I found a business and I created a business that was like literally like no one wanted to work with. So like because all the people that wanted to wanted to put lipstick on a pig. The company was worth half of what they thought it was. They weren't willing to pay the $40,000. They still need to hire all the advisors, and they complained and bitched and all this stuff, and they didn't have a timeline that worked. And then everybody that I wanted to work with was like, I don't want to exit. I'm like, no one knew what the word meant. And so like I learned this all the hard way, rebranded to Intentional Growth, the podcast, launched a new company in 2018-ish, 19 called Arcona. Started off as a boot camp education business. So like I was, spending 2 days teaching entrepreneurs and business owners how all of this stuff works, from valuations to finance to M&A to deal structures and all this stuff. And like, hey, like here's where like I would say that my investment thesis of how to actually make the impact that I want to split from all the other firms out there except you is I said I was in Ken's program in the exit planning. I'm like, none of these people have ever ran a business before. Like managing working capital, which is really fucking hard. Like payables, receivables, inventory, payroll. What about the distributions? What about taxes? I mean, like, so like managing that machine is really hard. And so I said I said this to Ken's engineer in 2017 or something. I said, dude, I'm convinced it's easier to teach because I got a D in accounting and I was a copier sales rep. I said, I'm convinced it's easier to teach the old me how finance works than it is to teach a wealth manager or a commercial banker how to run a company.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree on that because, like, at the end of the
I know
day,
you do because your business is
not well, but it's not fundamentally that difficult, right? Like, we're going through this with my 13-year-old at the moment, like, because we're teaching her financial management, and you have to break it down to be pretty simple, right? Well, they don't teach it in schools, right? So,
I know it's.
So you kind of that's a different.
By the way,
conversation.
I have a poster right here. I mean, like literally my girls know that money printing is bad. I'm like, how is it that you know that, but no one else? Yeah, it's
Anyway, that's a
because
totally separate conversation. But I think you're 100% right. But I think your point beforehand around what does it mean for someone? Because your stuff now, we've known each other for a few years, right? So I've seen kind of how your businesses have evolved and your focus has evolved. But your stuff now, right, with this emphasis on owner independence, what does that mean for you?
I believe that in it, and I'll give some lens to this after I answer this or some context is so one of my fundamental beliefs, Nick, is like so I'll talk about what I believe. I believe that having a goal is really important for human mental health. So like having goals that then calibrate our world around us allow us to then say, okay, like, I mean, it's literally like in perception, it's in psychology. Like if you think about like a door that's in front of you and you have like if you're on a stage and you have a chair, you'd want to sit on that chair, right? But what if you're trying to run for the door? The chair is an obstacle. Like, so your goal brings everything else into perspective. So to not have the goal is insane.
Well, so
So
it's
like,
the story of the, like, if you don't have a destination when you're trying to do anything, right? You end up somewhere, but it may not be where you want.
yeah, and all the yeah, correct, but like actually neurologically and psychologically, that's what results in anxiety, depression, all these chaotic emotions that I don't want. I want to wake up and I want to be addicted to life, honestly, because my shadow self of like chasing dopamine the unproductive way, I've been down the road, man, like booze or whatever it is. It's like waking up and doing hard shit is more rewarding, actually. And so, okay, what do I believe? I believe that we have to come up with a goal. I mean, a business is the most amazing way to make the biggest impact on the biggest amount of people over the most amount of time span. Well, that's one hell of a goal and a vehicle to do that. I mean, it's like Noah's Ark, essentially. So, like, to understand how this vehicle fits into the game of life, then becomes okay, well, how do we do that? Well, the nature of a goal then allows us to see our constraints. And I am sick and tired of the entire world pretending we don't have constraints. Like everybody just pretends that we have infinite money and infinite time. And it's like, fuck off. Like your health and your time and your money are completely fixed right now. But like you have to, so like, I guess at this point, Nick, it's like, okay, because I'm back to what does independence mean? It's like, okay, well, if I want this, whatever this is in my future, I have to acknowledge my constraints, which is time, cash flow, and wealth as it relates to a business. So I'm not in the health space, right? Health is very important, but so it's like, okay, well, time, what do you want out of your time? So like I've got a chart up there that like life is good, which is like the how many weeks in your life. Like it's very
Oh,
morbid.
one
By
of
the
those
way.
ones where it shows you how far.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Oh,
got
I
it.
know the
Cause like,
ones.
yeah, because like I give myself to 100, not 85, right? So like, and then I drop dead. But then we like what? Okay, so we have time, and then our cash flow and our wealth, and which is equity in a business and cash flows. So like by seeing these constraints, Nick, to say, okay, like Nick, you're working in the business 60 hours a day or 60 hours a week. You're making 250 right now, but that's a combination of salary plus distributions. And your company's worth 500 grand if we actually understand valuations. So there's like this education that has to come into play to say, Nick, you got constraints, dude, of time, cash flow, and wealth based on how the game works. If you say to me, I had someone say, I want to be a billionaire. I'm like,
Oh God, don't get me
I
started.
would like to be Hulk Hogan. Like, whatever. It's like, it's so silly. Unless they're really close or there's a path that's visible with the constraints. Right. So I say this because like I do not care, Nick. Like one of my favorite things now is I'll never tell anybody what to do. But if someone says I want to make, what's the timeline? What do you want to do out of your time? How much cash flow do you need? And then what's your equity value that your wealth that you're trying to accomplish? But using finance, we can see the trade-offs to say, okay, like Nick, you can't get there right now. Like how many EOS implementers are like, just hire an integrator, just hire these people. It's like, they have no fucking money. They're making 500 grand and they need it. So like, okay, well, how are we going to finance that growth while maintaining their income? Line of credit? Is it mezz finance? Like there's all these different ways to do it, but like then there's the trade-offs become visible to say, okay, Nick, do you want to keep 100% of your company Yes, but I also want to get there faster. Well, I'm not God and I'm not Jay Powell. I can't print money out of my ass. So like, my point is I throw it all back on to the person saying like, here's what the constraints are. Here's what you want to get to. And then what are the trade-offs? And so independence is, to me, is like, I want complete control over that entire situation. I don't want anybody telling me what to do. I want to understand the game. I don't want to make my bets accordingly. And I know that like we make plans and we get punched in the face. So like, I don't know, man. Like, I'm convinced that there's a huge spectrum in between the growth and the lifestyle. And there's a lot of, things in reality of macroeconomic supply chain issues, demographics and interest rate issues and money printing and all this stuff that come into play. And if we don't understand that stuff and we're just pretending that we're just going to, straight line it up to this perfect situation, I think it's delusion.
Well, I think the problem is there's certain things that you can affect and there's certain things you can't affect, right? And then you end up with this idea of too much complexity overall, right? And so like, I was joking but not joking about moving to Dubai. I'm moving to Dubai because I'm simplifying my life, right? Like in one way, but maybe adding complexity in another way, right? But but the point
There's
is,
trade-offs, right?
yeah, there's trade-offs, there's all those things. But I think what you said, which is really interesting to me, because I ask this question all the time to people, what do you really want? And I actually think most people can't answer that question.
I agree with you. And like, so here, I'm fascinated because the reason I liked you so much is why we jumped on and like within the first hour of us meeting each other like 6 years ago, it was like, we're too bad we're like across the pond from each other. But like, it was like, I have literally thought since my first memory, why are we here? What's the point? Like the only thing I think about is like, what is the point of life and how does it work? So I can figure out how to manage myself accordingly. And I realized that is like because I love thinking about that stuff so much. And I realized that no one else gives a shit. Not that's a big generalization, but like to the point where like my wife is like, can't you just be Ryan? I'm like, absolutely not.
It's just such like back to an esoteric question. The problem is it's just so broad, right? Because like I think what I find is true is people start on let's think about trajectories, right? Or lines, right? Best way to think of it. They start on one line, they think it's going to be a certain outcome, right? Or they have some intention around it. And it doesn't quite work out that way. And then they lose their way and then they don't know what the hell they're doing. Like the number of people who you go, okay, you got this. Why did you start the business? Well, I lost my job. That's a good one.
Or I didn't want to be told what to do, or
Yeah,
there was a cool opportunity.
my friend sold his business for 50 million and I thought I could do the same thing or whatever. So you have that, you go, okay, great. Okay, so what's happening now? We're talking now. What's happened? Oh, I just don't know if I want this anymore. Or it's not working, so I don't know what to do. I don't know what I don't know.
And like, what's this? I don't want this anymore. And like
people
when you
lose they don't know the answer, Ryan. They don't know the answer.
Well, I know. And like it's what I guess where I was going to is like I find it fascinating, and why I was curious on how you became this way is like it's not normal, I guess. It's not common. I shouldn't say normal or non-normal or anything like that. It's not common to like, dude, all I do is read and think and like, because I'm like if I'm going to spend my time doing something, Nick, I don't want the rug pulled out from underneath me like it happened when I was 27, 10 years ago. It's like I had like built this entire like idea of what was going to be, and it was like, whew, gone. And I was like, what the fuck was that? And I'm like, thank God I'm 27 and I can re-engineer my life. But like, I couldn't imagine having that happen at 65. And then so then there's the whole identity crisis. And then it becomes like, you have to get in, like, I had to get into these like deep questions. Like what's the point? I mean, and then all of a sudden 400 podcast interviews and there's billionaires going like, I don't know. Like,
well, I think that is the challenge. That's why these days, I mean, I'm 50, right? So there's only two things I think about these days, right? I think about what I'm doing any given day and what I want my world to be like in 3 years. That's what I do.
Like, is it this perpetual like tension between?
There is a little bit, but there's no like long-term wealth creation conversation. There's no like, oh my God.
Is it because you've already hit it, or why?
Well, no, because I think, put it this way, there's a piece of that, but there's also a piece of, and this is maybe a bit reckless what I'm going to say, but I think because there's so much complexity out there right now and it's increasing, and there's so much noise, and back to my point before, you can't control things, right? Like, if you said to me, Trump or whatever else, right? I think overall, versus what's happening in the UK. That's a really good economic decision for the short term. I don't know how good it is longer term. Here in the UK right now, everyone's leaving,
I know,
right?
it's
There's been
crazy.
10,000 millionaires go to Dubai in the last 12 months. Most of my friends are going, like we're all going, right?
So fucking
And
crazy,
then
dude.
you've got this massive shift to the east anyway for wealth, right? Depending on how you
Hmm.
define that. We're taking our kids out of school and they're all homeschooling. We're putting them in online schools that are global because we travel. So this so the reason I say you can only control what you're doing like now and you can only look forward maybe a small window, not these kind of 10, 20 years in the future stuff, is because we don't know what's going to be out there. So that's why when I talk to people when they're confused, I'll land the plane here a bit, right?
No, I like it though. I like it.
Yeah, when I'm talking to someone and they're kind of trying to go, "Oh, I don't know, in 10 years' time, I'm going to go." Listen, are you enjoying your time right now? Are you getting up every single day and enjoying what you're doing? Are you spending it with people you want to spend it with? Do you have a team around you that can like take away the stuff that you don't like doing? Let's say you are working in your business, to use that term. Are you doing the shit that you like, right? Or are you doing all the stuff that you don't like?
Yeah,
Let's work
right,
that
right.
out,
Yep.
right? And if the answer is, "Hey, I'm sort of doing about 30% of what I like and 70% I hate." Why don't we fix that quickly? Why don't we fix that in the next, 90 days to sort of 6 months? Let's do that. But let's work back from 3 years. In 3 years' time, you might not have got to where you're going to get to at the end of your life. But in 3 years' time, let's work out what your life's like. And then let's work out if your business and the decisions you're making now are going to get you there. And I have actually had some people either sell their business very quickly or even decide to close it down if it's not to a certain scale
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
they can't join the dots between those 3 years.
Yeah, I'm tracking it, Nick. I
It's
love it.
interesting, isn't it, though? Because
Well,
it's not to disagree that we shouldn't have a bigger wealth plan, because that's why I said it's a bit reckless. But I also think that there's so many unknowns at the moment. You can only take the elements that you probably can put your arms around in, and certainly conceptually.
well, honestly, I think you and I are completely lockstep with this, and I don't think it's reckless. I actually think it's the most prudent thing that someone could do, and I could explain why I think that. And I don't say that lightly either. And I think that's where, and a small digression, like I try to always explain to anybody listening to me, whether it's my clients or on the podcast, like I don't want to give advice. I'm just like trying hard to understand the truth to manage myself accordingly. And then hopefully others can benefit from that too. And so like I don't want like anything I say, I'm subject to I could change my mind. It's
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
of
of
like my
course,
little
of course.
asterisk. And like
Nothing
and
wrong with
it's
that.
not and I just say stuff with passion so much that sometimes it can be misconstrued. But okay, there's so much behind what you said, why I think it's the prudent thing, Nick, and why you and I, when we were going back and forth on that LinkedIn post with
Oh,
Jason from
yes.
MMT, and this ties into valuations, just ripples into everything. So, like, one is I'm not too rigid with how I think about my goals. And I think that's really important because I watch like two ends of the spectrum from like talk about goal setting is like someone that's so rigid where like if they're like, we're gonna get the shit kicked out of us. It's life, right? So like you're gonna be constantly unhappy if there's this gap between this rigid vision and where you are. And then there's like no goal. But the way I have it, and I read this book, The Halftime, or called Halftime. It was like Halftime Institute with Lloyd Reeb and Bob, what's it, Bob Buford? From success to significance. And when I interviewed Lloyd years ago, he's like, I don't know what the future holds, but I know it's going to feel like. And like that snapped into perfect, like, right. It's like, I want to feel peace, happiness, content. And like, there's all these different things that I can like, who do I want to be talking to? What kind of things do I want to be talking about? Like, but it's very like it's hazy. And so, but then it allows me to course correct within because like to think about 10 years out is insane. Back to your point. And so not only is it insane for our goals, but what I think becomes like the framework for managing that uncertainty and chaos. Cause like if we're constantly every day as we're bringing more chaos into clarity, but like that's the constant, right? And like the constant is our constraints and the constant is the chaos. But when I think about, okay, how does this impact valuations and everything? It's like the fact that I'm watching these people take out 10-year SBA loans to buy companies. And I'm like, for God's sakes, like fucking like Sam Altman went from like a trillionaire to potentially DeepSeek taking him out on the knees in 24 months. Like I can't predict 10 years out. So like I look at these valuations and the discounted cash flow of what's going on and I'm like, people are insane. Like, so I'm sitting there going like, because Nick, I mean, my alternative to doing this would have been like create a fund. And I like talk to my buddies in M&A. I'm like, I wouldn't touch 90% of this with a 10-foot pole.
I'm doing both at the moment.
So
'Cause
like doing both of what? You're like,
well,
but you've got to, but like, I'm curious on how you think about risk because back to, okay, well, okay, let me add one last piece of context, and I want to hear how you're thinking about investments and operations. So like, and I think this relates back to then with my clients because it's similar philosophies. Is like, okay, the difference with my clients compared to like Walker's world, we're like, or any buyer's world, we're like, you're saddling something with debt, like based on all these assumptions, and you got interest rates, so then you have to have the growth, or you have to get some sort of deal structure with rolled equity or earnouts to make the thing mathematically work. My clients haven't sold. So it's like, shit, dude. Like, so like literally like as an investment philosophy, Nick, and so I got a couple clients right now looking at maybe selling. I'm like, okay, if we're truly thinking about money as an investor, it's like, okay, if we do the build up methodology from the weighted average cost of capital, it's like, okay, risk-free rate, 4.5. Well, I have a base layer that I'm coming and I'm operating from, and I can't unsee it. The money supply growth grows at 8% a year. So if you're not hitting 8%, you're completely effed. And you're locking in a loss. So now we go, okay, well, risk-free rate is not just 4.5 because you're locking in a loss with any kind of bonds that are below 8%. M2 money supply growth is growing at 8% a year. Most likely more because of the baby boomers and all the shitstorm that's going on. So then you go, okay, public markets. Well, they've been hovering at purchasing power, and Apple stayed the same in revenue, sold less iPhones, and they have less cash flow, and it grew in value. Well, like all these stocks are overvalued. Then you go to private equity firms, and like we're back to like buy your company. That's a commercial cleaning company or a electrical contractor or a insert the home like the services companies. And I'm like, wouldn't it be awesome to own a company that kicks out cash flow while someone else runs it? And then so what ends up happening is by doing just the investment build up methodology, like, and again, there's some reasons people would
I
want to
think
sell.
if you look at the thesis though, right? So I'm not a big believer in the public markets, right? And I'm certainly not a big believer in valuations which are based on potential kind of future value, right? So if you think about the bell curve, as far as I look at it, is in the mid market where I used to operate, we would look at real cash flow, and we
Real
would.
cash flow. What a concept.
I know it's mental, isn't it? Like wow, right? And we would just, I mean, we would just compound assets, right? Like, and it was, and you know what? This is where people I think get confused with private equity. It's the most simplest math in the world. It really is. Like that. Like if I think about Getty was probably my biggest educational part of my career. And I know in the last probably few weeks that Getty and Shutterstock, another big digital media business, have just merged. And I'm like, of course they have. Because the one thing that we were taught in private equity is that not only does scale matter, scale de-risks everything. Right? If you own a market and there's still a market, like of course, if the market doesn't exist, that's a totally different point. But there's still a market and you own the market and there's only one choice, right? You're not going to have too many issues unless, as I said, that whole market goes because of AI or something. But like if you kind of think about what you can affect, I still look at these businesses that are generating a hell of a lot of cash. They're probably under leveraged and undervalued. And the whole idea of horizontal and vertical integration, that strategy, which in its simplest form is the private equity playbook, it
Mhm.
kind of makes a lot of sense. It
Well,
makes a lot of
right.
sense.
It makes a ton of sense. And here's where like I think context matters, right? Where like I watch because of zero interest rates for 15 years. It's like, I mean, you go back to health, Nick, like it's okay to, I mean, VC and PE and public markets and like they all are supposed to be part of the whole. When something is growing faster than it's supposed to as part of the whole, it's a bad situation. Well, I mean, like you go to, and I forgive me if I'm slightly wrong in this, but like Delta Airlines, their private equity exposure went from 12% to 38%. Well, that's fucked up. And then how much VC, like Chamath from All In Podcast posted what's going on in VC. I'm like, yeah, they're screwed. I mean, like, because they got over, it's like a cancer. If it grows,
There's
if your
no,
cells,
but there's no value in those businesses. So the issue is,
right, and the unicorn should work, but it shouldn't be a bigger percentage of a portfolio than it should be.
Well,
right?
I think even the concept of the unicorn doesn't work anymore. Like the unicorn's a concept from say the last 15, 20 years when you had so much disruption coming through from technology that people were kind of starting to put these. I mean, I can tell you from my personal experience without naming some companies that I've seen valuations that were put out there for VC raising come in at 10% or thereabouts of the real value when they actually extrapolated that value. So, you know, it's not the same as, and I'll tell you what I'm doing now, right? It's not the same as, you know, here's this landscaping firm down the road that's reasonably sized and is making 1 million of EBITDA,
Right.
and the guy goes, hey, I'll sell it for 2 million EBITDA for whatever reason, or I'm being deliberately like exaggerating, like. I'm like, okay, so all I need to do is just keep the train on the tracks for a year, and I kind of paid for it regardless of debt. Right. So the window of kind of the valuations are not exaggerated, but people are kind of extra, you know, want to sell for reasonable valuations. And then, you know, what you can do after that is quite incredible because the fastest growing investment group or entity in the world is family offices, right? Because entrepreneurs are now kind of liquidating various parts of their own wealth to go and buy these companies within the mid market. And
Yeah, to
then
play the playbook that we're already talking about, though, which is like, and like, but it's so fascinating because like, I have dozens of people that I have talked to in the last 6 months where had they understood the playbook that we're talking about, they probably would have kept their company, got out of their goddamn job. And I'm not saying that that's the only thing, but like, so here's what I find fascinating. Like, it's like, okay, well, if you have a good business in the middle market without a lot of debt, like you have the ability to withstand more stuff and turmoil that's going forward. So, like, if I'm inserting this thought process into someone that hasn't made an event yet, it's like, what, by understanding what are we solving for, what are your goals, and seeing the free cash flow projections. By the way, 1 million in normalized EBITDA is probably 500 grand in free cash flow after working capital, taxes, debt, and I mean, like, so, like, and again. So, like, even on a 5 times multiple of $1 million in normalized EBITDA, most of those things can't cash flow the debt unless you infuse more equity, but you have to find someone that's willing to do that. And then they have to play the big scale up game like you're
this
talking
is, I
about.
mean, I'll tell you what I say to people all the time, right? And again, this is parochial or whatever. Um, you know, if you're making, let's just put a number out there. If you're making with your dividend and whatever you're taking out of the business, you're making $1 million a year, right? That's your income. Unless you've got ambitions to have massive jets and Rolls Royces and whatever, there's a lot of money, right? Like, you know, when you think about that, you can, you know, it's a decent sort of thing. Now, I know a lot of people who kind of have incomes between 1 and 3 million a year and no debt in their businesses whatsoever. Now, is that a lifestyle business or is that a growth business? It's a lifestyle business in my definition, right? I've got no intention of selling the thing, right? I'm just doing what I'm doing. Now, they get approached by private equity firms. And what I say to them, and this is the bit I say, you know what? Instead of you trying to scale your company by going and buying other companies, if you're really happy with your 2 to 3 million bucks a year, sell some of your business to the private equity firm and use their cash.
So, like, are you talking like, like when you're saying $1 million, just for some clarification here, because I think this is where the context and the nuances will hold some importance. Where is that after like, so like, how much is going into this person's bank account
Yeah, so a
personally?
million bucks after tax. So let's assume, and again, because
Okay.
you know we
Okay.
can talk about the US, but then I'm working across the world, so there's different things. But
Okay.
let's say for argument's sake, you're taking 2 million of kind of profit or whatever else, but what you put in your pocket is a million
Is
bucks
that
a year.
$1 million? Okay. That's super helpful context, Nick, because I think therein lies the issue. Is I have so I'm working with clients right now. So like where I'm at with my business right now, and kind of weave in some question I never answered fully is
Sorry
after
about that.
Arcona. No. So no, this is why we're chatting, man. It's so freaking fun because like I'm just trying to always figure out, am I crazy or not? Like, am I crazy? Am I on track? Because if I'm going to be helping other people, I got to make sure that I'm, searching for the truth. And so with Arcona, after the boot camp stuff that I was doing, and then COVID, decimating that business, digitized it, and it was kind of a quasi online stuff, which helped me scale and the exposure nation and some outside of the country, but it's mainly America and US. And then I launched the CFO service and the financial dashboard services, which we had some partnership stuff on. I got exposure to a lot of financials, like hundreds of people's financials, companies. And where I have fit in the markets, because I'm explaining this to give some more context back to like the incomes and the problems that people are seeing is, and I go back to the Census Bureau of like, where are these companies? What's the bell curve? What's the Pareto principle of like the 90-10, 80-20 of like how many companies are how big of size? Well, with Arcona, it was hundreds of companies, Nick. I mean, at least where I saw their actual financials, like what they were pulling out of it and like what they were doing. And then with my clients, like they're below that often. So like I'm working with some people in that cohort of what you call a lifestyle business, which is fascinating to me. We're like, for sure, it's a lot, like, of course, keep that business. But like what happens I'm seeing is like it's the 3 to 750 after tax income while eating shit running a company. And that actually, but like what for the listeners, which is super important, which again, backing into all of the jargon of all the bullshit of normalized EBITDA. I mean, these could be like multiple millions of dollars in normalized EBITDA and they're pulling 700 grand eating shit. And so it's like, okay, those people are the backbone of America. They're not the people. I mean, because if you, so I did some research and it is, if you're making over 600 grand net income or income in the US, you're in the 1%. So then like if you're in the 0.5%, it's a million. That's with net income. These are people with the K1s and everything. So I'm like probably just slightly below with what you're working with, which is these people are literally stuck in their company. And like the blanket advice of people just saying, just spend money in your company. They're like, screw you, because every 100 grand investment or, $1 million investment goes against their income. So we have to see into the future using the 3-statement forecasting to see when can you make your income of $500,000 through distributions to get onto the other side of that capital.
Well, there's two.
Flow.
I mean, there's 2 points, right? Some business models, depending on what industry you're in, are easier, if you like, to be able to drive levels of kind of efficiency in, right? So that's why I said it before about
Professional service.
it's easy.
Professional
I mean,
services. Yeah.
it's so easy, right? And what I'm finding now is that the reason that I started doing that earlier stage scaling, so growth and scale, is that we go in there with a set of optics of what you look at kind of best practice. So there's business A over here can deliver this, so why can't you? And let's now map your business. And if you're not taking at least 30% net off your service business, you got some fundamental issues,
Yeah.
right? Like
Do you
in
know
private equity.
Marcel?
Sorry.
Marcel Petitpas? He wrote Software as a Science with Dan Martell. So
Oh, okay. Yeah. So yeah. Okay.
yeah, he's got Parakeeto, and he's helped. Like, you guys should do some collaboration and do some podcast swap. And so it sounds like, I mean, because he's doing just work with agencies, but more on the financial side of things. But to your point, there's a playbook that's available and levers you can pull to make significant impact.
Well, I just look
Pretty
at it through
fast.
3 things, right? I look at it through the current predictability of their pipeline, which is effectively their sales and marketing. So forget any of the clever advanced scaling stuff. This is just how well they're geared. I look at it through the lens of process, which is really about their team and systems and how they're affecting that through automation and everything else these days. And then the last thing that I'm looking at is through the lens of profit, which is where we would probably align on cash flow. So unless you are fully understanding how you can affect those 3 things, right? And of course, I could make it more complex by adding a lot more things, but I sometimes think that's over the
Unnecessary. Yeah.
yeah. And I'll tell you one of the things that we focus on a lot is things like the value proposition of a business, right? Like
Mhm.
how well it's positioned.
I think it's just back to like the education, Nick. And I think about education versus like experience. Like, you're bringing both, and that's what I'm trying to do too, right? So you can talk about these levers, right? But it's not theory, right? Like, because at the end of the day, I see your
Well,
handshake.
remember
It's
my
like,
background was turnarounds, right? I used to go
I
in and fix
know.
companies. So like, I wasn't really, as much as I say private equity, I wasn't really the finance guy. I was the operating guy. I was the CEO. So the only difference is I was operating under the ownership
Distress.
of a private equity world. Yeah, there is that. But it was under this kind of like you've got these big financial brains sitting above you, giving you different things to look at. But at the end of the day, it's still people and teams and processes and vision and all that stuff is what we had to have. It's just it just gets talked about and focused on differently when you're owned by a private equity firm. So
So,
so
like,
many
but I think this is what is this is what's so fascinating about how both of us landed here. And to not do all of the things that you just mentioned with the financial lens, it's like there's two sides of the same coin. Like, because like I like when I think about the difference between theory and practice, it's like every one of the people listening in that runs a business knows that next week they will or will not have money for payroll. Right. And like cash flow is like gravity or like just like with health, like you either are or are not healthy. And then you could do all the scans to do that. So to ignore part of the equation is ridiculous. So that's why I kind of gravitate towards Ken Sangenaro's 8 functions, where it's like it's complexity theory, but we're trying, you and I are trying to simplify it for people that are not in this space. But
yeah,
like,
exactly. But I'm also the other thing I'm doing is I'm saying that okay, like there are certain sort of metrics within any business or industry which you can sort of typify as key things which define whether a business is successful and healthy. It's a little bit like going and having your blood work done and realizing that you've got a big problem, right? And so like I'll give you an example. I've got a client who's a recruitment agency, right? And margins were around about 12 to 15% net. We got their margin this year to 42%. We did one thing. Did one thing. We offshored their whole sales team and most of their operations to South Africa. Suddenly, payroll was cut by almost 40%. Okay. Offshored. Simple. And people go, "Oh shit, that's really clever." It's not that clever. It's just, your cost base is too expensive for what you're trying to do. You're either going to have to increase the pipeline, back to my point, or you're going to have to do some stuff to increase the profitability. So what are you going to
yep,
do?
yep. Well, and that's where you just explained the constraint, right? And I think that's where it's like taking and understanding the goal brings light to the constraint and why that lever is so, because it's a cash flow lever at the end of the day. Like, I mean, you have to fix something in that equation in order to get to the other side. And going back to like, because I want to hear more about the value prop and some of the other things that you're doing, but like, I think as it relates to like, we're like putting context around the marketplace that you and I are both working in. And like, because I look at the businesses, Nick, and like the companies that are making, I mean, like most of my clients are making $1 million in normalized EBITDA. I'm going to use that word to like a few, 3 to 4 million bucks. But like none of them feel like they're crazy kicking, none of them are happy with where they're at with their cash flow net, right? And their time balance. So I'm trying to get them on the other side of that so they can have as many options as they can. But
But
like what I find,
there is a line though, just to jump in on that, Ryan. There is a line where I call it, it's kind of like the messy middle, if you want to use that expression that gets used a lot, where you're kind of too too small, right? Or you're too subscale to kind of have all these options. But like to get through to the point where you do have these options, you've got to kind of get very, very intentional about the different decisions you make, and to your point, the access to what resources or constraints that you're going to deal with. And what I find,
yeah, I
I
like
tell
how
you,
you
it's
put that.
again, it's
Yeah.
super simple. It's so bloody simple. And as soon as I tell you this, you're going to go, "Oh my god, that's too simple." But trust me, it's not. Everyone who gets to that messy middle that I work with, they think the answer is more people, more products, more types of customers, more. We need to do more because everything that got us to, let's say, the 7-figure mark, right, to get to 8 or whatever the goal is. And do you know what I do most often than not? I cut back everything. So you know how you've got there's one client, right? 15 products, not kidding you. We went back to 3, right? They doubled their revenue in 18 months.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I was looking at the
So
chart of
easy.
it. Yeah.
So easy. Because
Yep.
the reality, I mean, I think back to all the bit when I was in private equity and we were scaling into the sort of multi 8 figures. The only time we ever added more was through acquisitions. And when we added more, right, it was already a functioning business in its own right. So it brought all of the asset with it. We didn't do more by adding more organically. very rarely. So it wasn't innovation, it was acquisition.
Well, and like we're like, I'm curious because I always say a word of caution. I was talking to a really dear friend of mine, over 4 million in normalized EBITDA, talking about acquisitions, and I'm like, dude, like, what is the goal of that acquisition? And like, they're a really good company, by the way. And so like,
It's a great EBITDA. I mean, 4 million, 5 million EBITDA is a great company anyway.
it is, and but like they're still working on things, doing things the right way, and like, just like, but like build the machine and then stack something else on top of it. I mean, kind of the whole PE. I mean, it's the PE playbook of the platform, but like I watch people try to like get into a new business. I mean, like I look at what we did, Nick, in my old family business. Like, get the foundation set the right way and found and like in the sound, then you can stack something on top of it. So like you have a process for all the integration, which I mean, this is where I'm watching, Nick, and like this kind of goes back into like your and I like riff on LinkedIn, is like I'm watching so many PE firm dumpster fires, and I'm not saying all of them are, and it's a lot of within the context of this hour conversation of know what you want, understand the deal structures, understand like caveat, caveat, caveat. But when I look at the macro reasons why these things are happening with interest rates, the unbelievable assumptions that these PE firms have to put on the growth in order to hit their IRR. And like, I'm hearing these stories. I'm like, God, it's just a bunch of idiots. Like they can't integrate these companies. They're spending $1,000 an hour on Deloitte 25-year-olds. They still have like, I mean, this one guy that I talked to, he's like, yeah, man, they sold it for 50 million bucks. It was like 6 million in normalized EBITDA. Still has an AS 400. 3.5 years later. It's a fucking mainframe. Like the company doesn't even know what to do with any of this stuff. Like they don't like, and the whole thing is like, hey, can we make a better PowerPoint deck so that way we can sell it to KKR and black, stone. So like, it's just this momentum in the market of like, hey, we have to offload this stuff because how many PE firms propagated over the last 10 years, I think is just a word of caution. So I'm curious on like how you are seeing that. Cause like, by the way, it's still completely possible to sell your company for way more money than the cash valuation to a bunch of financial idiots that have chosen to play that game, right? And then you can leave $3 million in rolled equity and not need it because you got 20 million net, which is okay. So like, it's so nuanced, man. I struggle with seeing
I think
it
like
all.
you've got to remember, like in the same way we're saying the world's evolving and changing, the look back on how private equity has operated in a cash-free world versus when now there is a higher cost of capital just means that they changed the way they do it. So the reason I said family offices are the fastest growing entity is they don't have a quick turn. I mean, I was part of the exit of the last big exit in before the market crash in 2008 was a business called EMAP when I was the marketing and strategy director, and we sold to Bauer Media. And the guy who bought it, a family-owned business, said, I have a 20-year view on this company. And he still has it. And now he's bought everything. He owns the market. But he said, I want to return. Well, actually, he didn't even say that. He said, I want to hand it to my children in a better place than I bought it. Now, he paid $2 billion for our company.
Yeah, it's next. Yeah, it's
So,
conscious capitalism. You see that book back there, like I mean, the Brent B. Shore, Sonny Vanderbeck. I mean, I don't know if you follow those guys at all. I mean,
yeah, I mean, it's a bit more than that because I mean, I remember I work out of Dubai a lot, and like the number of family offices are just people who've got like a lot of money and they want to put it into assets and they want to hold for longer. They're not necessarily putting a lot of debt into those businesses like the way private equity used to. So what's going to happen in private equity, in my mind, is where there was like 4,000 firms and now there's like 15,000 firms or some ridiculous number. It's
I
definitely
saw
over
those numbers.
10,000.
Yep.
They're just going to go. They're just not going to exist. So you're going to get a mass consolidation of private equity firms back to the core. Remember, private equity, when it started 15, 20 years ago, was only a few firms. So you're not going to have...
This is we're completely talking the same language because again, if we just use Delta Airlines exposure that went from like 12% to 35-ish%, I think we can extrapolate that across pension funds, endowments, because they had to have this return, which is why it went from 4,000 to 15,000. Totally tracking you, Nick. And like, but like, I think it's important for people that are owner operators to like, what's back to your and I's joint mission of like, what's the goal? Because if the goal is a cash out and just like, it is what it is, the earn out, the rolled equity, don't bank on that, because like these people's assumptions and the structure and their, view of 10 years, what is the probability of that all coming true and being realistic with that?
It's just going to be different. I mean, like I think the thing I would encourage people to appreciate is that the mass valuations, which were hugely leveraged, they're not coming back anytime soon, right? So the idea that like, you're 25 times EBITDA because you could put like 80% of the whole investment in debt and you borrowed that for no interest rate. Those days are gone. But like, the idea, that's why I said beforehand, if you can sell your company, depending on your situation, if you can sell your company for 3 times, 5 times, maybe up to 10 times, depending on what's going on, that's still a pretty good outlay, right?
Oh, it is.
Particularly
Oh, totally.
particularly if you're going to go and do something else. And like, in certain industries which are really well researched and where the private equity firms have changed the terms of the investment, where they haven't got those crazy IRRs and MOICs and all that, which is happening, you're seeing different terms. Because if you think about it from an investment perspective, like an endowment or a pension fund, buying companies and getting that level of return, even if it's less than what it used to be, is still a bloody good return.
Well, they have to, because they're
Yeah.
like, I mean, the average pension fund in the US is like 60% funded.
Yeah. Well,
And
yeah, I
there's
mean, like,
30.
yeah, most of our when I was working in some of the UK private equity firms, most of them came from Canadian pension funds,
Well, this
and
is
stuff
why,
like that.
Nick, I think it's so important. Like, but this is why I think it's so, you and I are so lockstep about understanding the game. And I call it understanding the game of ownership, which is just not the job, not the operations necessarily. Because like the operations and like the operating, framework that you're built, that you're bringing to people, or like, I mean, EOS, scaling up, OKRs, VOP. There's so much of this stuff out there where like understanding the why behind everything that we're talking about, like pension funds went up by, or I'm sorry, PE firms went up by 10 or 10,000. Where's the money coming from, and what is the money's need based on the people that are deploying it, right? So like they have to get the money. Like my aunt, I always joke around, my aunt Stacy and Aunt Paula, who are teachers, they're freaking 60 and they retired and they need $2,800 a month for 40 years. And like there's like tens of thousands of these people and there's only going to be more. So like they have to get the return. And I think but I just, with a couple of podcasts I did recently, Nick, with the investment bankers talking about ESOPs versus private equity versus strategic versus family offices, and their need for that IRR and their timeline. So I gave a like kind of a lens through that, because back to your point about family offices, like, hey, if there's a reasonable capital matching here, everything's great. Right. But because I think the pie is going to be shrinking, and then what is going to happen with 10,000 people that are making money on AUM of private equity money? They're going to be screwing a lot of people over. It's just going to be naturally what happens in the process of creative destruction, like you just described. And you and I think, are lockstep of like, hey, let's just make sure that you don't hook up to one of those shipping sinks by accident,
Well, two
sinking
things are
ships
happening.
by accident.
Two things are happening. So one is how we talked beforehand about top of the bell curve and service based, and there's a reason why I work with service based businesses, is because there's still the wealth transfer thing going on, right? And if you look out there, as you said, the majority of those businesses, even though a lot of them are subscale, there are a lot that are not, right? And there are a whole heap of those that are getting consolidated together. So most of the private equity firms that I'm sort of talking to now are still focused on consolidating service-based businesses. Simple. And they might bring some technology in to create efficiencies. So you've got that piece of it. And so they're sort of changing their positioning. So instead of going after this idea that 8 out of 10, so what it used to be is like if you bought 10 investments, 8 had to work, and certainly a couple of them had to fly. And what's happened in the last 5 years is that's turned almost into like a VC thing, right? Whereas how VC 2 out of 10
Yep.
have to kind of work. That's
Yep.
what's happening
Yep.
in private
Yep.
equity, and everyone, the shit's hit the fan. Like, hold on, we used to get 8 right. Now we're getting only 2 right. What the hell are we doing? So
And
instead of
that's after the purchase of them, right? So that's like that, nothing to say with like the 2,000 companies they looked at before they bought those 10, and now only 2 of them have to
Well, it just changes
afterward.
the gearing. So, and of
Yeah.
course, private
Yeah.
equity doesn't want to operate like VC. Private equity wants to make some safer bets. So the only way you can make safer bets is you change your targeting, right? Because you're not going to affect the cost of capital. So you want to go after more sure bets. And more sure bets, back to our original pieces, cash flowing businesses, right? So as long as I don't overpay for a really good established cash flowing business and I buy 10 of them, right? And then all of a sudden I compound all of that, then actually my certainty on the return, it's not going to be as sexy maybe as some of the bigger exits in the future, but the return on some of those is going to be better, more sure. So I think the private equity world is changing. But when people come to me and say, "Oh, I do want to sell my company. Should I sell to private equity? Private equity is bad, bad, bad." What I say is like, they're going through their own. Well, they're going through their own pain, right? They're going through their own thing. They've had to change and evolve. And there are some really, the way you've got to think of it is there are some very smart people in there who know what to do, and you've just got to find the ones that you can work with and think of it like a partnership.
Well, and like, yeah, agreed. And like, this is where, so like, I mean, where both of our, I think our education focus comes in, education plus the coaching is like, for me, like here's how I worded this at a workshop recently, Nick. It's like, the matrix, right? I feel like with this, I could see the matrix, right? So, but like there is no spoon, right? Everybody's arguing about whether it's gold or silver, but there isn't a spoon. And like we're like, and the difference of the matrix versus not is we're talking about like we can see the zeros and ones. So like I say this because like I didn't want to be an expert in all this stuff, but if the result is now I don't have the ability to have other people steal my time because I'm distracted because of all the shit that all the propaganda. And I guess that's kind of like at the end of the day, being your constraint. It's like, okay, well, if someone truly wants to sell their business, right? Like you and I would probably support that and say, okay, well, what's the best capital match with what your goals are? Well, to not see the matrix is to just guess that it's all going to work out versus saying, okay, well, here's how valuations work, family offices versus PE firms. And by the way, PE firms aren't good or bad. I always say that, Nick, that all exits are neutral. It's all about your expectations. So then it's just matching up deal structures, capital, what's the goal of the capital on that's the buyer, what's the goal of the capital, the seller. And it takes that level of seeing the matrix to be able to then mash it up. Cause like that, I think back to that LinkedIn post, I have a belief that if you and I were involved, that whatever the hell happened there wouldn't have probably happened. It's like, well,
No,
like
but
there
it
was
comes
a
back to
massive amount of expectation gaps.
the reason that we do what we do in the ways that we do it is, I often say it's called leveling the playing field, and that's probably not 100% right because it's almost a little bit like if I'm going to
Market
play a game of
efficiencies.
I'm going to play a game of chess with you, right? And you've played chess for 20 years and you know how to play because you've got that kind of muscle memory, and I've never played before, right? It's going to be pretty boring for you, right? And it's going to be terrible for me, right? And it's going to take me a long time to probably work it out, and maybe after a while I'll start to get a few wins, but whatever. And so, it's like what we've said consistently. Like, if you do want to sell your business one day to whoever, right, understand the options and then understand how the games are played because each of the options has a different way of being played, right? And selling to a strategic versus selling to a private equity firm versus doing an ESOP or whatever it is, they're very different games. They're very different
It's
games.
like literally step 2 of my independence by design framework is called choose your game.
Yeah. Well, exactly. But
Because it depends on what game you want to play, right?
I often say
Lifestyle
to
business.
people, I just say to people these days, just don't even think about worrying about selling your business, right? Like I know that sounds opposite to what I do because one of my companies is called High Value Exit. But like if you do want to exit, right, in terms of the idea of, and I put that under the connotation of selling, right, then we can get into that conversation. But back to my point now, right, is I've got people who I'm working with who are creating 4 to 8 person businesses, right? Doing 20 to 30 million of revenue and taking like, EBITDAs of over 10 million with
What kind of
4
businesses
people.
are those? What
There's
kind of
not many of them.
businesses?
Well, I can tell you who's got one of them, Taki Moore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so this
His
might
his
be a
business is
small.
about 30 million now.
Well, and I know Dan Martell has got stuff like that going on, and like so here we might go into small digression for people that are listening, but I'm curious about how you're scaling your business, and I think this is tied into services. So I don't know if we want to kind of go down this path because I'm fascinated. So okay, put some context around what I want to go with some of my questioning is services based businesses are expertise. right? And like, and I think about AI and all the potential demographics and the workforce, all the things going on that are swirling around like this big soup. Um, I'm curious on how you're scaling, because like what I'm planning on doing this year, Nick, and then how that layers into next year is I've been really hammering out my framework, which is my curriculum and my ideal clientele, which I think is probably just slightly lower than your, like, is from a size perspective. But like all my clients are, they need to get they're in that messy middle. So maybe you and I are similar, but so ironing all this stuff out, building my online curriculum and all that stuff to build. I'm literally at this goal. The goal of 2025 is scale my audience. And so I'm working on a TEDx that I'm going to be doing this year. And then I got my email newsletter. I'm going to give all my content away for free, all of it. I mean, that's back to Ken. I read Taki's book, but like as I have been, how this ties into then I think services, which I think is fascinating, is so as I thought about like my business and some of these other experts that are other services, it's like, okay, well, do you certify a bunch of people like Gino Wickman and Ken Sanjanara, the Exit Planning Institute? I'm like, well, I haven't seen that work unbelievably well. And like, even as Gino had, like, obviously is probably one of the best examples. I mean, you got HR managers now as EOS implementers. So like there's a certain like dilution that happens over time. So then like, as I think about what Taki's model of like a pyramid of access, right? Which you and I have talked about. We're like, okay, with after my individual clients, then it's the group scale next year is what my target is I scale that group community version next year with all the content with that infrastructure. But as I've started to realize this, Nick, this applies to like most service companies.
Yeah, no,
As I
so that's
really,
why
as
I do it. So the curriculum I teach is what I do to myself.
so you're okay,
So,
you're literally building the Taki. So you're essentially helping the Taki, or you're taking like the Taki model
well,
and then
if you
we're
think about it, it depends. I mean, like there are back to my point of principles, right? So there are certain principles. Like I think, and I was listening to Daniel Priestley talk about this. If you haven't listened to some of his stuff,
I haven't.
he's on Diary of a CEO, like the biggest
Okay.
podcast. So it's worth
Yep.
listening to.
Yep.
And he was talking about certainly for service based. He was saying in the future the importance of personal brand and what he calls an elegant business model. Right. So personal brands hugely important, right? Particularly because of how people buy these days based on trust and whatever else. So whether
Mm-hmm.
that's not a Tacky Moore thing or a Dan Martell thing, but they're good examples of the model, right?
I mean,
And
you could also look at the extremes of like the Elons, or I mean,
they're
like
all doing it. They're all
they're
doing
all doing,
it.
and then you got Jordan Peterson or Andrew Huberman or Peter
Oh,
Attia.
they're
I
all
mean,
doing
like,
it. They're all doing it. So I think, if you wanna beat AI, and of course AI can still have an impact on this, or you want to kind of at least align with AI, you've got to have a personal brand. The business brand idea these days, you can have multiple business brands and you have multiple product brands, but the personal brand sitting above that is super important. And I think it's going to become more important because I think
mhm.
AI may catch up to this, but I still think strategy and creativity sits above what AI can be, certainly in the immediate future.
You and I are 100% on the same page with this. And honestly, Nick, if I were to just break it down to the simplest way, in for all the context that we talked about with today and how I think in the same way that you and I do, when I was looking at my old business and the reason I got out of Arcona, I'm like, I was like going, how in the hell am I going to scale the services company to like, and I was like, okay, well, I could grow like this. I could have this much people on payroll and I'm doing all this shit. And I'm going, I'm at like, okay, like I had two partners and I'm like, I can't even like mathematically slice this pie enough where the equity would be worth, because it had to be scaled back to your like scale to growth. And like, it has to be, we have to do all this stuff over 5 years. And then the AI impact and all, I ran through all of the risks and all of that happening and what my income would be along the way. And I was like, fuck this. And like, I was just like,
It's just too
it was a
difficult.
person and it was a personal decision, right? Like it had nothing to do with my business or my business partners. It was like, I like back to your point. I'm like, oh, and okay, if the pyramid is the personal brand, and then there's services outside of that that have to be connected, and then it's like I'm totally tracking you, dude.
Yeah, it
Like, I
does.
mean,
I
it's
mean, and the reason it's not to say that you can't create a personal brand above a retail business, but when I say service based, really what I'm saying is simple business model. Because if I think about an agency or I think about a consultancy, or certainly what I call it I've got an education company, right? And I educate founders to be able to build more valuable, scalable, profitable companies. which gives them the option to do different things with them. That's what I kind of do, right? And so if you've got, let's say you've got a recruitment agency, right? You still need to go out there and find new clients, right? You've still got to use brand and direct response marketing around that. You've got to create a value proposition which is as unique and remarkable as possible so you're not competing on price, right? So you've got to do those things. You've got to build a team with systems and processes, but that's where you can start to integrate things like AI, back to my elegant business model from Daniel, right? And then understanding the financial piece, where I call it under the profit and cash flow, that's where you start to probably lean into a bit more of what you've been doing for years, where you're starting to increase that financial literacy and what I call the optics. But those businesses, service-based businesses, a lot of them can be virtual in the future, unless you're providing like a home services, plumbing type of stuff, right? Where there's a bit more infrastructure to it, even though I know people who are actually scaling those things with similar philosophies. So for me personally, the way I'm scaling, to your question, so what am I doing? So this year, doing a lot of stuff. My LinkedIn's gone crazy this year. I've doubled down a lot on
Yeah,
personal
you've
brand.
crushed it, dude. Like I honestly, I was like, huh. Nick and I were kind of like back and forth, back and forth. Next thing I know, like, shit, you had 1,000 likes on that one. And
Oh man,
I'm like,
40,000
I
now.
don't know
Yeah, I
what the
know, but it's
hell you're
growing
doing.
quickly. But I'm not doing too many things. Like I focus a lot on LinkedIn, right? I do podcasting and this sort of stuff. But then, my goal is slightly different. And I'm very transparent. I even say it to my clients. I say, listen, we're going to bring you in once you've got to that sort of, you're transitioning from startup into scale up. You're making that decision that you want to kind of grow a bit more scale. You're probably at 1 million of revenue, and we're just going to set an intention, right? The intention is to get past 10 million. Oh, I don't know if I want to get past 10 million. Well, I don't care. We have to have at least a North Star, right? So let's go for that. And then as we're doing that, we're going to build your business or help you understand how you can build your business in a way that's going to serve your vision, right? Not just the business vision, your life vision. And there's lots of different nuances to how we do that, right? But my goal there is to have, let's say 100 business owners in that program, all of the same type, because again, if they're a similar type, they can work together. I don't have to be involved. Like if you, one of my, I wouldn't say necessarily a friend, but someone I met has a business that's doing just, I think he did 18 million last year, and he focuses on salon owners, like like hairdressing, spas,
Oh, salon.
salons.
Sorry. There,
Um,
I'm like, what?
18,
Okay.
18 million,
Yeah,
18 million.
yeah.
And he runs
That's awesome.
sort of, consultancy, advisory, and he has events. And what he said, which was really interesting to me, he goes, whenever we have a live event, he does 3 live events a year. He said, like, I'll do some teaching and whatever else, but everyone hates it. All they want to do is get together and just talk to each other. So they pay him just to be in the room. So if you do kind of focus on one type of business owner or whatever else, and you get them, you intimately know what their challenges are, and you intimately understand, then actually it's very scalable, because all you need to do is create the community.
Yeah. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I mean, I've read Taki's book. I mean, I've read every single email he sent me every single morning for like a year. Um, and like maybe some of this is like head trash with me, but like I really like, so I got 16 people I'm working with right now. And I've got like the infrastructure of that. I've been doing my weekly calls now, and we'll have to have you come in one of the weekly calls. And so I do weekly calls, and then I do the last call. So weekly Tuesday calls, but the last one of every month now is just a group. So because they wanted no guests, they wanted to just do it as a group. We're looking at getting together a couple times this year as well. So like of my clients though, Nick, I've got e-commerce, I've got different industries. And so like here, I'm just really interested to hear how what you think about this. And maybe because of my financial literacy, that the nuances don't bother me as much, because like they're all the same. They're all an income statement, a balance sheet, and cash flow statement, and it's an owner who is a shareholder. So that's how I look at it. And what I found
It's hard
fascinating,
to scale, Ryan. So, so
I'm tending to agree with you, but hold that thought, because I want to give you some more of my mindset to see if you think I'm on track or off track, or kind of an idea where you're going with this. But like, so, um, service, like I bet you half of them are services, or they have a services or it's a distribution. And maybe there's some more refinement of services, because like, well, with Imaging Path, our old family business, I mean, we're doing 20 million, but it was like people that were selling shit and fixing shit. And so like there's a lot of my clients that are doing similar things where it's mainly services. One of them's e-com, or a couple of them are e-commerce, where it becomes more in manufacturing, which are different. Like I know, like, I mean, even with CFO placement, Nick, like you could take a manufacturing CFO and place him on almost anybody, but you can't take a professional services CFO and put him in a manufacturer. And so like, but what I like about all these people is they all have a similar mindset. They all have like a similar type of profile and personality of like their lack of ego, their desire to do good stuff, the desire to do hard stuff, and to work on the framework. It's just they're slightly different business models across.
It just depends on your goal. I mean, the way my model works is I have people coming in at that sort of earlier stage, which is under the brand high value business, right? And we define what that means. And then if people want to migrate up to high value exit, which is where I do my advisory, I pick and choose them from the group. And then I have, equity or some form of more longer term. I effectively join their boards. But because I'm helping them go from, let's say, 1 million to 10 million in revenue and obviously everything else around that, I'm building credibility that I can help them do that. And then if they want to make that decision, that they want to kind of do the thing I've done for years. So my models, I'm not trying to make it massive. But here's the thing that I think is important back to being specific is it changes the conversation less about you and more about them. And if you have lots of people in there and it's just their mindset that's the same, like, if you put them all into a room and you've got a dentist and then you've got a guy who runs a construction company and then you've got the e-com guy, they'll have a great conversation about business, but they're not probably going to help each other in the same way as if you had three, I don't know, dog walking companies in the same room.
Um,
And, what's that?
so I'm tracking you, and like that's been like every sales and marketing piece of advice forever is like niche down.
No one wants to do it, Ryan.
But okay, so like
It's
here's
actually
the
my
only
podcast episode next week, my solo one.
well, and I you have to send it to me because like so here's where I think could be potentially different is I with my owner's playbook that I created. The owner's playbook is effectively, I mean, I don't market it like this, but it's like the private equity meets family office playbook. And it doesn't matter what type of business model you have. And so like I like it, whether it's like building out the financials, building out the leadership team, understanding like the actual operations, how it stacks into that, but it's all tied to your owner's goals. So like on our calls, it has a lot to do with, building out your executive team and how to compensate your CEO or recruit your CEO and short-term, long-term bonus programs and how it ties to your goals. And so it's a lot of the mechanics of what has to happen across these
But
companies is the same.
I'll ground this for you in a really because I had to go through this. That's why I'm so like clear on it now. Um, I sit on the board of a business which it's my best performing business last year. It went from 2 million revenue to 8 million revenue in 12 months. Now they're an education business, but they focus on professional builders, right? And what I realized is if you focus on it's quite hyper niched when you get into it. I know another business that's doing 8 figures that just focuses on painters, right? What happens is even though like you're going to talk about sales and marketing, you're going to talk about hiring people, you're going to talk about all these different things, right? So your curriculum and my curriculum is not going to be fundamentally different. But when you go out there and you present it, right, your sales, marketing, and delivery all becomes one thing.
I think I'm close to that though, Nick. And this is what is fascinating because like it with the independence as the marketing, like I mean, like so I'm doing my Vistage workshops, I'm doing my keynotes, I've got my curriculum.
It depends on your
So
goal. It depends on your goal.
well,
So
and like with here, here's some more context. So like out of half of my clients, half of them are in a CEO peer group. I'm choosing not to direct them on the operations. There's this assumption of like you have operational help from EOS implementers or your Vistage or your EO, and there's this ownership framework that's missing, and ownership education that's missing,
I think
and
that's
an
right.
ownership
I think
playbook.
that's right. But it comes back to like it's not to say like I could take my framework, which is as I said around pipeline, process, and profit. I could point that in any direction I want to. I could point that to real estate agents. I could point that to business owners in
Hmm.
general.
Hmm.
I could point it towards, as I said, dog walkers. One thing that really hit it home for me.
I feel like you like dog walkers.
No, I tell you why. You're gonna laugh at this. I tell you what hit it home for me. So when I was working in Taki's program, he has 780 people currently in black belt, and he has 100 in what he calls his version of boardroom. Boardroom is you've gone over 7 figures. Every single person in boardroom is hyper niched. Every single one. And dog walkers are in there. There's a person who runs a kind of coaching business to help people grow their dog walking companies, and it's doing $2.5 million a year in revenue. And there's a guy actually who was focused on B2B businesses. And then he said, I'm just going to focus on recruitment. And he went from making about 500K to making 1.5 million in less than 12 months just by going after that. And the reason is it was much easier to target on things like LinkedIn to be able to get specific. That's why. So that's why it's interesting. And there's another guy, I won't mention his name, but he'd resisted niching for a long time and just focuses on 7 and 8 figure business owners. He then niched into a certain area and doubled his business in 18 months as well. So I don't. I think as a natural thing, people, and this is why I talk about value propositions. Back to that point, it's not to say that you know you have to kind of go really, really specific, but you certainly have to be more specific than business owner or whatever else. And I think the problem with targeting a mindset is you can't go and use Sales Navigator on LinkedIn to target a mindset. Right? You have to find someone and then find their mindset within the communication, which just makes it harder. Whereas if I said, I only work with agencies in Wisconsin who do SEO, and that's my niche, I can find that, right? And I can scale from that because I'm going to super serve that thing. It just depends on your goals. There's no right or wrong.
No, there's, I mean, I can't argue with anything you said. Yeah, it's do you so like with I want a clarification for myself on are you helping your service-based business clients build a business similar to Taki's business model, or are you taking like so like for like a managed IT company or like a recruiting company or any of these service-based businesses, are you leaning them towards a model like this, or are you like
No, they're not.
like
They're not education businesses necessarily. I mean, some are, but like let's just take like I've got a lot of marketing agencies in my group at the moment. And I got them. What I did, and I'll kind of give you the sort of playbook on this, is I put it out there like you are a little bit and said, hey, business owners, and my background's a lot about exiting and selling for millions and all that stuff, as you know. And I thought, what am I going to get back? Right. So if I just put it out there in a broad way, what comes back? So we ran a beta for a year and then we got like just over 30 in the group. And I then looked at it and said, okay, of all the ones in the group, how many are B2B businesses versus B2C? 86% B2B. That's interesting. Okay, how many of that 86 are B2B services? Oh, it's 80% of them. And then, of those ones, how many are kind of, let's call them advisories, consultancies, or agencies? I know they're all a bit different, but they have sort of like IP that they're packaging up and they're taking it out to market and they're doing various things off the back of it. And it was 70% of that. So I didn't go out there saying I'm just focusing on agencies and
you
consultancies. I
learned
went
it?
out there and
Yeah,
focused
you
on.
learned it.
Yes, and then
Yeah.
I went and then what I found was interesting, and this is what taught me this. They started the ones that were in sort of little mini groups, like recruitment agencies or marketing agencies, started to talk to each other independent of me.
Mm-hmm.
And one
Mm-hmm.
guy, really interesting story. He's got an agency in LA. He flew to Australia and he had lunch with two other agency owners that are in my group down there. And now they're going to collaborate and put their products and services together and go to market together. And
Interesting.
I wasn't
Yeah.
even involved.
Yep. Yep.
So
No,
then it
I'm
made me,
tracking it. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
that's how I landed it. And so for now, if you see anything, I promote to agencies and consultancies. Now, does that mean that if someone comes in that's not like that, I won't work with them? No, but they probably won't be right for the group.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I'm tracking. Yeah. 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 Yep.
And that's
Yep.
how I
Yep.
do it.
Yep. So fascinating. So many questions. Yeah, I know. I know. I love it, man.
This is our long form podcast. Everyone's going. This is the fireside chat. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but I mean, this conversation is kind of the same conversation I have with some of my clients as well, though, because everyone, it's hard. It's hard sometimes feeling like you feel like you're losing if you do something. That's how I always felt for years because I resisted focusing on niches for years. And I was like, in private equity, we don't focus on niches. We just focus on businesses and, blah, blah, blah. But it just makes it harder sometimes for people to sort of see what you're doing and align with it. And I always think a confused mind doesn't make a decision. And so
Well,
then it becomes
well, I mean, back to like what is exit planning or what I mean, I learned for 10 years what messaging works. I mean, like, and so a couple takeaways that I'm having here is, and I'm curious on your thoughts. So like one is with my clients right now, we have that group, we have that community, and we have that, and we're building all that stuff, but that's not the scalable part. Like if I'm going to be building out my group for next year, I'm hearing you loud and clear that this needs to be hammered out. But I also think, yeah, no, and I've got a couple ideas. Because I mean, services and distributions is where I mean, that was in my old company, right? I mean, there was 30%, you know, stuff that we sold, and then there was services that had. I mean, so like there's a lot of, and there's a lot of that stuff out there. So that interesting thing that I'm going to probably unpack over time. But like, you know, what's interesting, Nick, as it relates to the people listening in or my clients, where a lot of different industries, but the commonality is they're trying to get above that cash flow to, you know, essentially the common thing that everybody has is extract themselves from the job. It's like get out of that job, get into the ownership seat, and then be able to have as many options. But what I think is fascinating, Nick, is back to your 3-year target of like build something within 3 years, and like, you know, we can't predict the complexities of the future. What I believe, and there's a common belief in the group too, is even like my friend who owns a manufacturing firm in Wisconsin, or my other client that's got a electrical contracting and technology implementation firm, or like it's like the fact that you don't have a bunch of debt allows you, like, I think that this model that you're talking about could actually apply for any company, the personal brand. We're like, okay, it's like, okay, said a different way, maybe because I'm thinking out loud, so bear with me here. It's like, okay, well, if the goal as an owner operator, I mean, you're 50, you're younger than you're right in the middle of all my clients, and like I'm 38, and like it's like, okay, well, what do I want? And what do you want? I want to be able to have freedom, right? It's like, well, I need the cash flow not tied to my time. That's what we all universally need. And then it's like, well, how are we looking at the dynamic of the cash flow and time? And then the wealth needs to be thought about. Because like I inverted my situation where I've now got wealth plays that I'm doing outside of creating equity in my own business. And that helped me then go, now I can look at high income, saving wealth and other investment assets. But I think about like my clients as they think about that too, saying like, what is our expectations for wealth in this business versus the time cash flow dynamic? And then building like, I mean, the word arc just keeps coming back to me because like it's going to be a shitstorm for the next 5 to 10 years with the demographics, the AI, like I mean, the dollar is like, dude, like we are in, like, to not talk about it is crazy. So it's like, okay, well, build yourself an arc that is also can like hit this wave that can be nimble. Well, what'll be the risks of that? Well, that you have too much leverage, that you don't have enough, you know, back to your niche, or like you don't have a personal brand. You can't be anti-fragile. Anti-fragile is another word that's like anti-fragile with time and cash flow, and a company that can be a surfboard through this shitstorm applies to all my, I think it
well,
applies to a lot of
that
people.
was the answer. I think that's what I learned from what Daniel Priestley said around the he calls it key person of influence and elegant business model. But the reason I focus a lot on service businesses is you can transform any service business into that model if you choose to,
Yeah.
right?
Right. Yeah.
And so I teach within my program, I do teach elements of personal branding based on what I've done for 6 years with the podcast and LinkedIn and everything else. So like, you know, and what I think is true is you don't have to have a massive personal brand. You just have to have a big brand within what you're focused on, back to why the niche makes sense. So if you're known, like I think Walker said this, Walker Dybel said, you know, he's famous in a very small room, like very famous in a very small room, right? And I think that's the truth, right? Like if you go into
Yeah.
the right, if I go to an M&A conference and I'm speaking on stage, like, you know, in that room, everyone knows who I am. But if I go to I don't know, let's call it, you know, Disney World, no one knows who the hell I am walking around. So,
Hmm.
so I think
Hmm.
there's nuances within all of this sort of stuff, but I think there are
I
certain
like it.
commonalities which are crucial. And if people don't, any business owner that we talk to, if they don't start to understand the assets that are getting created above and beyond their businesses, right? Because we're
Hmm.
talking about different assets here, then they're just going to have less options, you know, in the
Yeah.
future.
Dude, how much fun was this? I had a blast.
Have we bored everyone for our? This is our long form. Everyone's going. They've been talking for 2 hours. Like
uh,
what?
I, I've been leaning into it, Nick. It's been fun because I don't know. I love the Andrew Huberman podcast of the world. I mean, it's really helped me manage my life. And it's like, you know what? I just want to follow the truth. And I want to have people like you that are doing the same come on. And it's like, I'm blessed that I get to spend this time doing this with you for a job. You know what I mean? And like everybody else that I'm working with, they're in the shit storm and they like to help them get out. And so it's like, I don't know. I think that, you know, two people coming together like this and having a good conversation can expedite it for people while they're doing the other things in their
Well,
life.
and I also think, I'm very transparent around, like, I haven't got all the answers. I've got certain experiences, and I'm testing things and I'm working things out. Some things work well, some things don't work as well. But I'm very honest about all that stuff with people too. And what I always say, if someone listens to something like this and they get one bit of information that they can then action, or maybe it sparks an idea, maybe it was a niching conversation we had or whatever, right? If they then go and say, you know what, that's going to change me, and that puts them on a different trajectory and that gets them closer to whatever
Hmm.
their goals are, it's worth it, right?
Yeah.
It's worth it.
Yeah.
So that's why, and you and I have always aligned, I think, values wise on these things, and
It's been fun, man.
that's always been good fun.
Yeah, we'll have to keep do it a couple times this year, man. We'll
Indeed.
put. I know it's going to be. I think on both our podcasts, so we'll put both our links to
Yeah, let's
our
do that.
websites
So we'll
and our
do that.
shows and
We'll
everything.
work out. We'll come on some commonality around what we call the
Cool.
thing. Fireside
Cool.
chat. Ryan and
All
Nick.
right.
Here they go.
Hey, man, I appreciate it, Nick.
Always a pleasure, sir. Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Nick, and I appreciate you tuning in. Share this episode with a friend if you liked it. And my takeaway is that if you're doing the stuff that Nick and I are talking about, yes, it's really hard work, but it's going to set you so far apart from everybody else that's in your space, or honestly, for any buyers or whenever you want to extract yourself from the business. And I just think that that is one of the main things that I want to continue to get across, that this is all really hard work. However, the payoff is so huge, whether it's more freedom over your time, more cash flow, so that way you don't have to spend the time in it and you create options, or you get to the point where you can dictate the terms and the deal structure when you eventually go to sell. It's super enlightening and helpful knowing that people like Nick and the people that he's working with are working on the same stuff. So if there's one thing that you could do to take away from this, is go to ryantansom.com. I've got the IBD owner's playbook that I've been working on, where it's a Google sheet. You can go download it, get access to it, and start filling it out, where you're plugging in your goals, you're plugging in where you're at and building out the financial roadmap, the value growth strategies, and the leadership team and pay. And then I've got a tool on there called the decision filter that helps you think through big decisions that you're working on. So that way you can then reconcile it against the owner's playbook and the framework that I put together. So go check that out on ryantansom.com. And then stay tuned for next week, where I've got Mike Vermelt and his coworker Rick on the show, where we're going to be talking about what does it take to build out that future org chart of the leadership team. It's an awesome deep dive because Mike's been on the show talking about recruiting and building out your executive team, but we're going to be talking about their process on how to actually build out the future org chart and then reverse engineer, so that way you're leaning into building out that leadership team and your future org chart in light of the plan and the goals that you have. So you're not going to want to miss that one. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.